and welcome to Life Between the Notes, where we are going beyond the bio and bringing you interviews of your favorite South Central PA musicians. I am Kirsten Myers, a local oboist living in the Lancaster area, and with me today is Morgan Davis, a local flutist also in the Lancaster area. So hello, Morgan.
Hi.
Do you have your coffee, Morgan?
I have coffee and I have water today,
Oh,
so
you got it all. You're
yes,
covered.
caffeine
Okay.
and hydration.
So today we are thrilled that saxophonist Ryan Kauffman is willing to share his single reed experience with us. And Ryan, you have the dubious honor of being our first male guest on the show. And you are also our first saxophonist and first jazz artist. But we have no prizes to bestow upon you for this honor.
Very good.
You're okay with no prizes?
No prizes is just fine, but I really appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Yes, and we're so glad that you're here today.
Me too.
And today's episode is brought to you by Keystone Music Repair, which is an independent woodwind and brass repair shop in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, catering to the needs of student, amateur, and professional musicians throughout southeastern Pennsylvania and beyond. All work is done by owner and technician John Kirkner, who's been repairing instruments professionally for over a decade and has specialized knowledge in repairing double reeds. All repairs carry a guarantee that you'll be happy with the work or it will be corrected at no charge. Estimates are free and all work is done by appointment with flexible scheduling to minimize your time without your instrument. Visit KeystoneMusicRepair.com to see more information, to get in touch and schedule an appointment, and new this year, to see a calendar of all the performances from over 40 community bands in southeastern Pennsylvania. Keystone Music Repair is happy to support Life Between the Notes. So, full disclosure that Morgan and I both work around, sometimes with Ryan, at Millersville University. Although we really only see him in the jury room at the end of every semester, so we aren't exactly best friends, but hello, Ryan. So, and if anybody wants to know if you don't know what a jury is, those are kind of like performance finals at the end of a semester at universities where we basically adjudicate and grade our students. So they can be some long days.
Yeah, we've gotten to know each other while watching each other deal with stressed out students.
Yes. It's an interesting atmosphere.
It's the real, yeah, because they walk in and they're like,
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
For sure.
Pressure cooker
yes,
situation.
Yeah, for sure. So here's a little background on Ryan. He's a saxophonist, woodwind artist, and teacher based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He leads several exciting projects, including the 717 Collective and Triology, and is a founding member of the Naked Eye Ensemble. He teaches saxophone at Millersville University and performs throughout the central PA region, including appearances at Bethlehem Music Fest, Tribeca New Music, Central Pennsylvania Friends of Jazz, New Music Gathering, Lancaster Jazz Festival, Shenandoah Valley Bach Festival, Lancaster Summer Arts Festival, Rehoboth Beach Jazz Festival, and Roots and Blues. He has had the privilege of performing with Ron Thomas, Peter Paulson, Harrisburg Symphony, Reading Symphony, Lancaster Symphony Orchestra, and the Liberty Wind Symphony. So Ryan, that's a lot of festivals. It sounds like you're partying all the time.
I've had years to put that bio together. So,
yes, it's extensive.
It is not a nonstop party, but I have just with different bands that I've been with or continue to be with. You get opportunities to perform at these festivals.
Yeah.
Different things, and a couple of them I've been at more than once. So the Shenandoah Valley Bach Festival is an annual week-long one that's held in my wife's hometown in Virginia, in Harrisonburg. So that's an orchestral festival. every now and then they've programmed a couple of things. A few years ago, it was Bernstein's centennial. So everyone and their brother was doing symphonic dances from West Side.
Mhm.
And so being a saxophonist, that has a solo in the beginning of the movement, I think. So that was
Okay.
one reason I got to play with them. But we also did Mio a few
Mhm.
years ago. We did Creation of the World, which is a terrific piece where the alto sax takes the place of the viola in the orchestra. And we did this slightly lesser known piece by a Creole composer. The piece is called A Night in the Tropics, and the composer's name is escaping me right now. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
um, it'll come to me later on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah, that's great. So, so did you grow up in this area? Are you from the Lancaster area?
yeah, I think that would be the simplest way to explain it. We moved here when I was 3 or 4.
Okay. Okay.
So
All right.
my parents didn't grow up here. My family is not originally from this area, but um,
Okay.
when I was 3 or 4, my dad got a job here, and we moved here.
Okay. All right. And so, and like, what high school did you attend?
I went to Lancaster Mennonite High. That's where my
Okay.
dad taught there for about 40 years,
Oh,
and he was the Spanish teacher. And after middle school, um, I think it would be fair to say they leaned on me a little bit
mhm,
to go to Mennonite instead of go to Hempfield.
mhm.
Um, at the time, you're a teenager, but so I pushed back a little, but I was like, okay, fine. It turned out to be a really good fit for me, and I had some really great friends from there, and a good experience overall in high school.
Great. So, were either of your parents like musicians in any way? Did they play any instruments or sing?
No, my dad, he tells the story that when he was much younger, um, well, let me back up just a little bit and simplify. Both of my parents come from families of like 8 siblings, farming families. My mom is from way up northern New York, almost in Canada. It's an area called like Krogan and Watertown and Lowville, that sort of area. And my
Okay.
dad is from Wayne County, Ohio. Um, so both of them grew up in farming families, and there just really wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to learn musical instruments. Um, my dad sings really well. He was taught to sing shape notes by his elder sister.
Okay.
Um, if you don't know what shape notes are, I'm sure
Yes.
the two of you do. If our
Oh,
viewers don't know what shape notes are, it's a way of teaching 4-part hymn singing that goes back to these singing schools that were held in rural parts of America. Um, and basically, every note of the scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, has a different shape to the note. So it might be a triangle or a square or something like that.
okay.
Otherwise, it looks like normal notation. But it's a way to get people who might not be. It was a way for folks who weren't initially musically literate to learn how to read music at sight because they could find the pitches using the solfege that way.
Yeah, that's so
That's how my
interesting.
that's how my dad learned to sing.
Okay.
Something he still really enjoys doing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mhm.
Um, so when did you start? Did you start saxophone like in was that your first instrument? And did you start like in fourth grade when it's typically started?
Yeah, yeah, the sort of normal thing.
Hmm.
I forget if it was between saxophone or trumpet. For some reason, trumpet is in my head too. But I never took trumpet. I never played one or anything like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Saxophone was the first thing. Um, Typically around here in Lancaster, it's about fourth grade. They have the
Right.
the local band will come to your, or the high school band might come to your elementary school and demo a few instruments, and
Hmm.
kids get to sort of pick and choose what they think is cool.
Yeah. And did you like it right away? And like, did you always love it?
Um, yeah, I liked it. I thought it had a cool sound, and I thought it looked cool. Um, uh, I still think that, but I wasn't. I mean, I definitely was not a super dedicated student. I enjoyed it. I liked the sound that it made. Um, I think I remember my my private teachers at the time, who were basically whoever the band director was at Mountville Elementary School,
Mhm.
um, would send home notes every so often, sort of a parent-teacher note. Like, Ryan gets a very nice sound on the saxophone. He should practice more. Sort of a recurring refrain, I'm pretty sure, most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, like so far with like the interviews that we've been doing, that's almost like a common theme, that like practicing was just not, I think people assume that, as like adult musicians or professional musicians, that like from the get-go, like you were practicing like, all the time and immediately, and but it's just not necessarily a natural thing.
Not necessarily, and and yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's the type of thing that if you want to go there, you can look back at it and be like, man, if I would have been a little more dedicated, how much further could I be? But it's really not a healthy space to go into.
Yes.
So,
Right.
you know, I
Right.
just try to pull myself away from that type of thinking. I was being a kid, I was riding my bike and
Right.
playing with my cat or my
Right.
brother or the neighborhood kids. And I wanted to play baseball and stuff like that.
Hmm. Right.
There's value in all of that stuff too. And, it's like you can sit and think, and I do sometimes, like, oh, if I would have pushed myself in these places, I would be somewhere else. But I think it would take a lot, for the trajectory to be a little bit different.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, this was kind of apart from saxophone itself, but I think growing up, I grew up in a pretty sheltered, pretty conservative Mennonite environment. Our home church was um, was a very simple, wonderful, friendly, environment to be in. I do remember sometime when I must have still been in elementary school at the time. I remember our church kind of moving from always singing out of the hymn books, and like using these hymns with the shape notes in them and everything, to actually having like a guitar player up front, or maybe the guitar player and his wife, leading these sort of praise songs or worship songs. And I remember really gravitating to that as a really young person. Not so much from the standpoint. I mean, I liked the music itself too, but also I think I knew even at that time that I wanted to. That was something I wanted to be a part of. Like I wanted to be where the music was coming from
Mm.
somehow.
And
Um,
you studied privately eventually, in high school or before?
Before, yeah, I think it would have been somewhere around fifth or sixth grade. My band director recommended that I get with a private teacher, and so I think it was sixth grade. I got connected. My parents called down one of those lists or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, with a wonderful local saxophonist and gentleman, who he's now retired, but he taught for many years at Centerville Elementary. His name's Phil Smith, and
Okay.
Phil Smith was my saxophone teacher for many years, and yeah, so I owe him a real debt of gratitude just for keeping me moving forward and keeping
Mhm.
me engaged with the instrument, even when I wanted to like play guitar instead of saxophone and kind of like fool around with that.
Right.
Yeah, again, not really taking it seriously, but he made the
Yeah.
lessons fun and he would demonstrate stuff for me. He could play piano,
Hmm.
so um,
Yeah.
that was always cool to kind of connect that and like, oh, like we're playing take five by Paul Desmond, and like he can play the piano part. Like that's pretty neat.
Yeah. 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 And it brings a different aspect to it that they don't always, or students don't always get an experience with, like
Yeah.
certainly like in school. Um, Go ahead,
But
Morgan.
is that like when you started to get into jazz, was taking lessons?
Yeah, a little bit. And again, well, I mean, I'm not saying anything new here, but I mean, I knew very little. I mean, I had been exposed to very little sort of breadth of music at that point, but I mean, I knew my band music from school, and I knew music that was on the radio. I knew music from church. Um, but yeah, Mr. Smith introduced me to, like, I remember he made a tape. You may have to educate your viewers on what a tape is.
Right.
He
Cassette
made-
tape,
yes,
correct? Not
yeah.
Scotch.
No, yeah.
Right.
Uh, he made me a cassette tape of like some jazz artists, because I showed some interest in it, like, so. And I think there was some Dave Brubeck group on there with Paul Desmond. There was some Yellow Jackets. I can't remember who any of the other artists were at the time that were
Mhm.
on the tape, but I kind of liked it. I listened to it a few times. I think what really got me kind of hooked in a little bit was then when he started showing me how, like, you could just use these few notes and you could improvise. You could
Mhm.
make your own melody to what was going on. So that, again, to me, that was like, what, I get to just play the blues and like
Mhm.
do this thing. And
Right.
even with my extremely limited knowledge at that point, I mean, I knew that that was something that I was just really in love with right away.
Right. Yeah. And creating your own music really is, or
Yeah,
a version of
playing
it.
these sounds. I mean, I had the blues is such an American sound. We've all heard it, because it's in all of American music. And so as soon as he showed me some of the very basics about how to make these sounds
Mhm.
that are the sound of the blues, I mean, right away, and he basically had to stop me. He was like, okay, okay, okay. But it was really intriguing, and I loved it right away. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you decide that you wanted to make it your career and go into music?
Maybe so I would have been like 21 or 22.
Okay.
I was majoring in music at the time at
Hmm.
my college, but I was, believe it or not, I was a guitar major for about a year and a half, which was
Oh.
absolutely ridiculous. But but I was. Um, pardon me. Um, and then I took a little time off from university, about a year and a half, and then when I came back, I had sort of I'd like to think I had sort of sorted some things out a little more. And like, look, if you're gonna, speaking to myself, if you're gonna actually be a music major, you might want to pick an instrument that you have a lot more history on, and you might want to pick something that, I mean, you're gonna have to give recitals. You're gonna have to, And so at that point, guitar for me was like, I wanted to play Bob Dylan songs. I wanted to play Simon and Garfunkel. I mean, this wasn't the type of thing that you would do on an academic recital. Um,
Right.
but the
Right.
saxophone I had been getting back into. I was in the jazz ensemble at school, so I really enjoyed that.
Hmm.
Um, and once I got hooked up with a teacher, um, there, then that really started to. I mean, like probably both of you was your experience as well. If you I found that if if I could convince myself to get in the practice room and
Hmm.
start developing some expertise on something,
Hmm.
lo and behold, it was a lot of fun to sound better. And, um,
Yep, that's the truth.
and such a simple thing, but I think it tapped into a part of me, that I really, yeah, that I was getting back in touch with,
Hmm.
and so I just enjoyed that. Like, oh, this sounds way better, and then you get the positive reinforcement from your colleagues or from,
Hmm.
some of your professors as well, and that of
Right.
course really helps too. I mean, they notice. We notice when people really practice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we don't.
And when we don't, yeah.
Oh yes, goes both ways. So where did you go to college?
I went to Eastern Mennonite University.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Same
And
town. Sorry to jump in. Same town as James Madison in Virginia. So
Ah,
Eastern Mennonite is a very small liberal arts college. Um, we didn't have a saxophone instructor, so I went across town to James Madison for my saxophone lessons, and also for because I was a performance major, I needed to get chamber music credit, and there wasn't really a way to do any kind of chamber music credit at my school. So they sent me over there to audition for the jazz combo class because we felt like that would be maybe something that would work. About twice a week, I would drive over to James Madison and absolutely get smeared um, by the saxophone majors over there, which again was really really good for me at the time, having been in this sort of a little bubble
Mhm.
surrounding me. So realizing like, gosh, she can really play.
Yeah.
It was really good for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that's a huge motivation. So, and to be surrounded by people, of course, who are at a higher level than you, for sure.
Yeah, and it was fun. I mean, like we were learning tunes. We had to blow on these tunes. They had a combo class lined up where I think they had 5 or 6 student combos. You had to audition, and then they would kind of place everybody roughly according um, to experience level.
Mhm.
But then part of your exam was you had to play at the local club. There was this local club called Guss's
Mhm.
where the saxophone professor Gunnar Mossblad had kind of a standing weekly engagement over there,
Mhm.
and he would get really good rhythm sections come in, and so at that point I would eventually start going out to hear live jazz, to hear them play, and it was really intimidating, but also really inspiring. But then
Mhm.
the student combos, once a semester, you had to go to Guss's and do your set, and the teachers would come and they'd get a table and check out what you guys were doing. So that was great. It was really really
Wow.
fun
So
experience.
we need to
That's
have our
cool.
juries at Gus's.
Yeah, I'm sure some things would go more smoothly and other things would
Yes.
perhaps.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, I can see that
I
going downhill very fast.
Sad to
I
say,
think
Gus's is no more. So,
Oh,
no.
but at the time, it was the place to be.
I'm sure we can find another place.
I think it's interesting. Like it matters so much when you're a student. Like the to find that motivation of like hearing other people play well who are your age and also your instructors and um, I think seeing that as like motivation rather than intimidation, and just being like, man, that's like really cool. And how do I do that? And how are they doing that? And putting yourself in environments where you can be inspired that way just makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And it's both. I mean, I think, speaking for myself, I was simultaneously inspired and intimidated.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
and, I think too. I don't think I'm necessarily. I don't think this is necessarily really unique either. But just that, and it's not that I had a chip on my shoulder, but it was also I just had this. I also felt like I had this thing where like, well, I'm this Mennonite kid, showing up and trying to play with these kids who have obviously been practicing a lot more than I have.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just felt like there was a lot of catching up that
Mhm.
had to be done. I still feel that way, really, honestly.
Hmm.
But we keep at it. But so it was intimidating in that regard too, because they just seemed so much more, uh, you know, worldly wise at that point in their lives than I was. I felt like kind of lost and like, geez, how do you even like, okay, where's the club? Like, where do I,
Mhm.
how do I, all these things, right? Because it
Yeah.
all was so new to me.
Hmm.
Um, and then you hope you just don't embarrass yourself playing the music.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But
This
the
is
music was a hook. I mean, by that time I was listening. I was really listening to a lot of Joe Henderson, a lot of Charlie Parker, a lot of Cannonball Adderley. There's an alto saxophonist who one of Gunner's grad students introduced me to Kenny Garrett. Not literally introduced me to Kenny Garrett's music. Um,
Yeah.
I remember, and I remember one album in particular that came out in the late '90s called Songbook, Kenny Garrett's album Songbook, that I just had on all the time. All the
Mhm.
time. Joshua Redman was another saxophonist that I just had his music on constantly.
Yeah.
Um, to the point where like my housemates could sing the melodies. They all knew the music as well.
So you had just immersed yourself in being a saxophonist, really. Uh,
Yeah, and specifically in that type of music, although I had to do recitals as well. So I also at the time started learning that like, oh, there's all this like there are all these sonatas and concertos and
mm,
suites, for alto saxophone, and this is
yeah.
crazy. These are
Yeah, it opens up a whole different world to you.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I really enjoyed that music too, even
Mm,
though it wasn't necessarily where my listening would gravitate toward. My listening was always going back to listening to jazz.
yeah.
But once you, I found that once I took the time to learn these pieces, to learn the Lundy Sonata or to learn the Maurice Tableau de Provence, they were really rewarding pieces to learn and play. So yeah, I still enjoy them.
Yeah. So had you ever considered another career, or had it always been music?
Um, not sure. I
It's,
mean,
from what you're saying, it seems to me like you're just on that path, whether it was guitar or saxophone, like you were gonna stay in that realm.
yeah, but I don't think it was really that definite, especially not as a young person, as a very
Yeah.
young person.
Hmm.
I was really into art. I was blessed to have really great art teachers
Mm.
when I was in elementary school and middle school and high school,
Hmm.
and um, all three of them, Mr. Richter. I can't remember my middle school teacher's name, but and Mrs. Hauser as well at the high school level. They were
Hmm.
both really, more than I knew it, they were real mentors at the time too.
Hmm.
Um, Mr. Richter in particular, he created this whole like after school program for kids who just really liked the art room and wanted to do more than just the regular assignments that we were doing during art class. So it was kind of like it was like an extracurricular art class. We would
Hmm.
stay after school about one day a week and do these projects, and well, I just really love that too. Just
Hmm.
the way
Yeah.
that everything, drawing in particular, and charcoal, pastels. The way that pastels are kind of greasy, right? So like the way
Hmm.
you can kind of smear them and the way they feel in your hands, was just, yeah, it was a whole other thing. So I was kind of thinking about art when I
Hmm.
went to college too, and I didn't end up going that way. I just
Right.
I went the
Do you,
practical way, and I majored in music performance.
Much
is
more
that
reasonable.
so? Do you still involve yourself with art now?
Unfortunately, not so much. Not at least not in creating visual art at this time.
Mhm.
I still
Okay.
enjoy it. I might sit down and draw something, but it's really rare at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, and just being busy, of course, with life, we don't always have time to do all of those things that we enjoy and the hobbies that we like to do.
yeah, yeah, but that's a good reminder that that's there, and
Yeah.
perhaps that can come back at some point.
It's
Hmm.
interesting because, like, I mean, I have an interest I used to paint when I was younger, and um, in the last like 5 or 6 years, I got really into calligraphy and hand lettering and doing some watercolor painting. And then the last 2 or 3 years, I've not done really any of it because I just have been busy. And sometimes it's hard, I think, when you're doing something creative for a living to like give some of that time to another creative thing, because it feels like, if you've got the time to spend, it should be with the primary, or at least for me, that's the struggle of like having two things that are sort of similar in some way that you'd like to do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from.
So when you graduated from college, then like what was your first job as well, at least as a
Uh,
musician?
oh, as a musician,
Yeah. Or well, what was your other job if you had another one?
um, toward the tail end of college, uh, right toward the tail end of college, I had a housemate who had started apprenticing at a local pottery production studio that is it's a great little place. It's still in operation. It's called Blue Ridge Pottery. It's just off of Skyline Drive, um, in I'd say I guess it's Greene County. I think Greene County, Virginia. Little rural pottery place, but he just think I needed a summer job, and my friend Steve was like, "Well, I'm apprenticing at this place. You should just come, like apply, and like we could use a lot of help during summer because we get all these tourists coming down from the resort, you know." And
Mm-hmm.
so I did that for several summers in a row, where I would
Mm-hmm.
just, and then I took even after I graduated, I think I took a whole year and worked for the better part of a year there. That was the closest thing to art that I guess that I've done more recently, and that was more production pottery. I wasn't really doing. It was like, here's how you make this. Here's how you make this mug. Now make 100 of them,
Mm-hmm.
which was great. It's really it was a different level of discipline than I was aware of or knew about, and that was it was pottery for sale, so that was the bent there. But it was great and great people to work with. Um,
Yeah.
the, yeah, I don't know. I could just go
Yeah.
on.
No, that's so
It was,
cool.
it was
Yeah.
really cool. Now that I think about it, I mean, yeah, there were so many cool things about that job.
Yeah.
Being in front of this kiln where like it's like thousands of degrees in there, and it's just blowing flaming gas into this mound of fire brick, and then it has to cool down, and then when you roll out the cart when the firing is finished, we never knew. I mean, we knew pretty much if the firing had gone well,
Right.
but it was like opening a Christmas present every few weeks, really, because you just roll out this cart and it's like, did the reds come out or did they wash out and turn green? Did
Yeah,
the blue,
that
it was really cool.
I can totally relate to that because that's kind of like how oboe reeds are. You know, you just you
Yeah,
just work on it and you hope hope it's gonna work out at the end, and some of them will work. And but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that was my first kind of job, like during the tail end of school there. Then my girlfriend at the time, now my wife Christy, she went to grad school in North Carolina for viola, and I was looking for a grad school, and I ended up landing at Westchester University to do my master's there. So my first musical job then would have been, I mean, I had a TA thing as a master's student, but also I showed up for my first day at school for my advisement meeting, and Dr. Grab looked across the table at me and said, "Do you teach saxophone?" And I said, "Yeah."
Sure.
And so he slid a business card across the desk to me and said, "You should call these people." And it turned out to be Darlington Arts Center, which is a local. Well, I say local. It's Delaware County, but it wasn't that far from Westchester at the time. About a 20-minute drive.
Okay.
Um, it was like a community arts center. They taught everything from painting to pottery to dance to musical instruments and stuff. Um, so he happened to know that their saxophone teacher was leaving, and that they were looking, and so I called them up, and the they gasped on the phone and said, "Can you come for an interview?" And I was extremely green, but I went for an interview, and they very graciously to hire me, and I was there about 14 years.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So you had lived in that area then for that long in
I
the
was in
West.
Westchester 2 years, and then
Oh, okay.
just doing the masters, and then my wife and I got married, and we moved back here to Lancaster City, and I continued to commute because I didn't have
Yeah.
anything here
Yeah.
yet. No one knew who I was. I didn't have any students here. Um, you know, I,
Okay.
so a couple days a week I was driving down there to teach
Right.
lessons.
Yeah. Which is kind of what we do. I mean, you have to drive where the work is. So.
Yep.
So when did you and Christy get married?
2001, June 30th.
Okay. And she'll be happy to know that you remembered. And so, right. And so she's a musician, correct? Yes, and she's a violist.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Fantastic viola player.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what's it like being married to another musician? Like, of course you don't know otherwise, I guess. So,
Cover the point of reference.
right.
It seems normal to me.
Yeah. Do you perform together ever?
Yeah, I would say rarely, but occasionally, in the orchestras, so Bolero, symphonic dances from West Side Story,
Mm-hmm.
Neo, things like that I was mentioning at the top of the hour. We've
Right.
played together for
Right.
that. We do have a chamber music project that has been on hiatus for a little bit, but there are hints of that possibly coming back with two other colleagues of ours.
Mm-hmm.
So the ensemble is clarinet, saxophone, viola, and piano.
Okay.
And for quite a while, we were putting on these benefit concerts for Mennonite Central Committee's work around the world. And so that's going to come back. We're hoping next year, 2023. So I say that to say that there's since there wasn't any literature like for our combination, we've either arranged it ourselves or gotten people to write stuff for us.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a son, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And when was he born?
2008.
2008. Okay. So, and let's see. So, I'm terrible with.
I know. I was just sitting here.
How old is he now? How old is he now?
He just turned 14.
Okay. Thank you. I need my calculator. So, did that change anything for you when your son was born? Like as far as your career path?
It's pretty much everything that people tell you it's going to be, and so there was definitely a complete reprioritization of,
Right.
and there continues to be, continues to be necessary. I feel like to keep myself on track as a parent, just like what's really important here.
Just, yeah.
Who is really who are my allegiances with, but yeah, it really was a big change. I think one of the one of the one of the big advantages, if I could put it that way, of being two basically self-employed musicians was that we have been able to kind of structure our time around how to,
childcare.
How to raise a child. Let me say we've been really fortunate to have, my parents live nearby, so that's also been something we've leaned on from time to time quite a bit. But when Ezra was tiny, I had the luxury of being able to just stay home with him all morning and play with Legos or something until Christy would come home, and then we would do the
tag
handoff.
team.
Yeah, tag team. Your turn, and I would go off to teach lessons for the evening or whatever. But I don't know. I don't know exactly how other families do it, but I've gotten to spend a lot of time with him, especially at ages, when he was really little, and then elementary school, and now he's going into high school next year. Just gotten to spend a lot more time with him during the days like that I've really appreciated.
Yeah, that's great. The ensembles that you are currently playing in, one recently has been Naked Eye Ensemble, which is, I believe, a nonprofit organization that they commission works from like living composers, and they play works of living composers. That's the main thrust, I think.
Yeah,
of the group.
Working with living composers, and commissioning new work and then premiering that work.
Hmm.
sort of basically building a body of repertoire around the ensemble itself, um,
Yeah.
working with these
When
different teams.
when did that group start? When did that form? Do you
Ooh,
remember? Has it been 10 years? I don't know that it's been
yeah,
that. Yeah.
it
Okay.
probably has. Um, I remember at the time I was teaching at the now defunct Pennsylvania Academy of Music, which was downtown in Lancaster here.
Mhm.
Um, and the Naked Ensemble's artistic director and founder, Zhu Ping Song, was also teaching piano at the time there.
Okay.
So that's how we met. I think she put
Oh, okay.
together like a faculty. She sort of spearheaded like a faculty concert at the time. Uh,
Mhm.
I think I played a movement from a sonata or something like that, and then she and I ended up playing together on a few other things. Just the group wasn't even called Naked Eye Ensemble yet. It was just
Mhm.
we knew we wanted. She knew that she wanted to program a lot of new work.
Mhm.
So I think we did David Lang's Lying, Cheating, Stealing. I think that's the title of the piece.
Okay.
Um, and we played some other. I know I played a soprano saxophone and piano duo with her at the time as well.
Mhm.
We had several people. So, but I can't remember the year. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I was just curious. So, and and recently, you've been working on, or you did do a recording, recently with them.
Yeah, it's done. This is the third one.
Okay.
Um, it's actually it might be the fourth.
Mm.
I should before I get into that. This will be the third one. I think as far as in the the release of each CD. I don't think we have a title yet.
Okay.
Zuping might. I'm not sure if we have a working title for it yet, but
Okay.
it's finished. I've heard the masters and everything. It sounds great. I can't play any of it for you. I'm not
Right.
allowed.
Yes. No, that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's currently being shopped around
Mhm.
through different labels to see who would want to release it. But yeah,
Mhm.
it sounds fantastic.
That's great.
So those are some works by. Let's see. There's a composer up in Boston. His name is Aaron J. Myers. There's a work. One of his pieces is there. Rusty Banks, who both of you know, he wrote a new piece for us to play. I know I'm going to leave somebody out, so I probably shouldn't go too far. Naming composers. Local bassist, Mike Bitts.
Okay.
Um, he orchestrated and arranged a Frank Zappa piece for us to play, which was really a blast.
Oh, great.
Do something different. Um,
Hmm.
Ricky Belcastro wrote a piece for us. So there's several things on the disc that they're sounding really terrific.
And you guys are going to be doing a residency at Temple, is that right?
Yes, but that's all I know at this
Yeah,
point.
that's it.
Yeah,
No details.
it's in
Yeah. Okay.
September, and that's all I know at this point. But that's
Right.
exciting too.
Yeah. So what do you enjoy most about being in that ensemble?
Um, Aside from I mean, there's the general camaraderie. I just like hanging out with musicians,
Yeah.
basically. But the general camaraderie is great, but also, yeah, I think it. What's been neat about it for me um, is that I guess it would roughly fit under the umbrella of classical music in the sense that it's written. Our parts are mostly written out, so
Mhm.
I have to play these notes in this order, but it's much more. I don't want to be too descriptive because I don't want to like pigeonhole it or something like that.
Right.
Being the fact that it's new, there's like a rawness to the pieces. They're literally the ink is literally not quite dry. you know
Mhm.
when we're working on them, and then we're sort of workshopping them often with the composers.
Right.
So that's really cool to kind of sort of get a glimpse inside the composer's mind, um, and
Mhm.
get a glimpse into the birth of these pieces, and kind of like because some of them really
Yeah.
change over the course of the few weeks that we're actually workshopping the pieces with the composers.
Yeah. That's exciting. Yeah,
That's neat. It's really neat.
to be part of that process. So
Hmm.
very cool.
Do you
Uh,
end up involved in like any of the like nonprofit aspects of that? Because I'm sure like if it's a commission, there's a money exchange. Has that experience like been part of that, or is it really are you just focused on the musical aspect?
The second, my participation is mostly about that. Although I'm happy to, you know, we all help each other out in terms of loading in gear and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I just try to make sure that my part is ready.
so so as far as like your preference as to like what performance style you enjoy the most, would you say it's jazz as opposed to like gigging for shows, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely jazz and playing improvised um, music,
Yeah.
uh, which is not to say I that yeah that's just my favorite. But
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
all of these other things really, all of these other things that we're describing really inform, um, just like they would with anybody. They just really inform your musical personality,
Mhm.
and I think it's good to you don't necessarily have to. Um, well, you can't be a master of everything.
Mhm.
But being a self-employed musician, um, you do have to know how to be at least competent at many things.
Sure.
And then you may have those, one or two things where you know, you really sort of come into your own, or that just fits you personally like a glove. But then there's a whole bunch of other things that, if you want to work, you kind of have to be able to do,
Yeah, absolutely.
at
Right.
least at a competent level.
Mhm. Right.
And then
Right.
the
I
other
would.
things, and the things that are not, you probably should maybe say no to.
Yeah.
Well,
Good
and that's
advice.
hard too, though, because you're always like, oh, a job. Yes, I'll take a job. And then, oh, maybe I'm not so good at this one. But no, I think probably you're like the expectations for you might be a little different. We both play, very orchestral instruments. But I think saxophone is one of those instruments that sort of floats in between like more commercial, and then you have jazz, and there's some classical like you've been talking about. There are times that you play in orchestras, or new music, or so I think you're in an interesting position with your instrument. You're probably right in the center of a lot of those areas.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say, not to be. I'm not trying to be negative. I would just say sometimes it feels like you're the perpetual odd man out because of your instrument. Like you show up, there's like a running joke, where like the saxophonist shows up to the orchestra gig and all the other musicians just scatter, right? um, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to play bolero at every, concert, right?
Well, yeah, that too. I mean, the times you get to play that kind of thing are
Mhm.
pretty few and far between, and I've really enjoyed them. I mean,
Mhm.
playing bolero was super fun,
Mhm.
um, and playing Mio, playing the creation of the world was super fun.
Mhm.
That was wild to be sitting right, because I was sitting right under the conductor. I mean,
Yeah.
it was
Just
really
like a flute player in band.
yeah, it was quite the experience, So
Yeah. So I imagine that you have gigged for shows like musicals and that kind of thing as well. So do you play other instruments? Like, do you play the flutes? Like, or have you ever had to like double like in those shows or triple?
yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I'm a little self conscious saying that I play the flute in front of Morgan, but I do.
Right.
I hold the flute. Uh, no,
I also
I
I
actually
hold the flute.
yeah,
I don't touch the flute.
That's okay.
I
I
don't
don't
even
touch the
hold
oboe
it.
either.
that's
So.
fair. Um, yeah, I mean, uh, I've come to really love the flute. Actually, I practice it quite a bit. that's probably, if I had to pick my favorite double or something like that, that would be one of them.
Mhm.
But yeah, I play piccolo, flute, clarinet. Um, I have all four saxophones. I
Mhm.
can play bass clarinet. I don't have one
Mhm.
currently, but I have done all of those for theater playing, mostly in a substituting context.
Mhm.
And every now and then I will do a full run,
Mhm.
depending on the theater.
Okay. And yeah, and speaking of gigs, you said that in the fall you have an upcoming Coltrane inspired mass that you'll be playing for. This is like John Coltrane we're talking about. Um, and so how did that come about and the idea for that? Do you know? Were you involved in that, or you were just asked to play?
I was asked to play. But we've done that. We've already done that twice at St.
Oh,
James.
okay.
Yeah, this was at St. James Episcopal. Um, they for quite a few years they had this tradition of doing these sort of themed Saturday evening masses that are slightly less formal,
Mhm.
and sometimes they would feature music by, sort of like there'd be a theme to the mass, like it'd be a mass, but it'd be the music of Bob Dylan along
Right,
with the mass, or something similar to that.
right.
So yeah, I don't remember the year specifically, but they invited
Mhm.
me to do that several years ago, and we've done two of them so far. Both times we did the entire Love Supreme suite from Coltrane's album Love Supreme.
Oh.
So it's pretty intense, but it was speaking for myself, it was really intimidating to take that on, but it was also really meaningful personally for me,
Mhm.
and I think it was really well received in general.
Mhm. And and why was that meaningful for you?
Um, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like a cliche because when you talk about Coltrane, people tend to bring up "A Love Supreme" because it's one of his best known works, one of his best known albums. Um, I think personally for me, it's meaningful because at that time in Coltrane's life, he was, he was moving from. He had been clean already for a few years, but he was moving out of a period of dealing with addiction
Mhm.
and having gotten cleaned up, um, and he was moving into his music in general was moving away from playing sort of standard song forms and playing sort of Tin Pan Alley tunes and things like that, like you would maybe expect in the sort of general American songbook or American songbook repertoire that jazz artists use so much.
Mhm.
He was moving away from that, and his music was taking on more and more of an overtly spiritual bent. I mean, it really was. And in fact, in that particular album, there's a poem on the inside liner notes that reads kind of like a prayer or like an incantation that Coltrane wrote. Uh, um, and if you listen to so if you read those words and you follow along with movement 4 of the Love Supreme, which is called Psalm,
Mhm.
you can see that he's intoning this text on the saxophone. So it's like word for word, note for note. We know that he did that on more than one album, more than one tune. It's just we don't have the text for any of those other ones.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, I mean, just coming from my background and coming from a point where growing up in the Mennonite church um, was was really meaningful for me and continues to be really meaningful for me. Finding a jazz artist of his stature who would so overtly just put his spiritual thought
Mhm.
out there.
Right.
Um, it was kind of shocking to me at the time. I mean, uh,
Mhm.
when I first heard that album, um, and kind of checked out the story behind it. there's some of the
Right.
stories behind that, and read read about Coltrane, about his life, and all those sorts of things. Um,
So it was just an album that had an impact on you.
yeah, yeah, and like a lot of his music has. I mean, and you can hear that there's a sort of uh, seeking cry in his sound in particular that um, I just hear it. I can identify with it
Right.
somehow.
Right. Okay. And go ahead, Morgan.
Those services at St. James, though, those like themed masses, I think that's such a cool concept. And like what you're talking about, and what you know that album and that experience of playing it being meaningful for you. I think it's interesting to tie those things together for people who maybe aren't musicians, but it's like giving a little bit of context into the way people take their art and then explore their spiritual experiences or like whatever's going on um, with their self inquiry. I just think that that's a neat thing to offer to people. It's a cool overlay of those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and I think yeah, there's a few things in that music that are just kind of juxtaposed. It's not the only album of its type. I mean, Sonny Rollins recorded the Freedom Suite.
Mm-hmm.
Max Roach recorded the Freedom Now Suite. There are other sources from that time, and it's kind of a product of the times. You're talking about mid '60s, so this is heavy into the social rights or excuse me, civil rights movement, and yeah, you just have to kind of take a glance at the news and the sort of current events of that time period to sort of put that music in its context. It's really something to investigate.
Yeah.
And then to connect it with the church is also
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a cool thing that I feel like there's other places I've lived that like that sort of thing wouldn't happen. That's like a sort of a feels like a Lancaster thing to me to
Mm-hmm.
fit all those pieces together.
Hmm.
Yeah. And making it accessible to the public a little more easily as well, and just exposure to that type of music that not many people have an opportunity to listen to as well. You had mentioned to us earlier about the art of jazz being, or part of it being passed on verbally, like you were speaking of like an oral tradition of jazz rather than in like a more formal setting. Can you describe like what you meant by that?
Jazz education, as we call it, jazz education is kind of a funny thing, and I think what's important for me, for someone of my generation, and also for younger people now who are getting into this music, um, who uh, who are learning how to play, you know, how to play jazz and how to express themselves that way. I think it's really important for all of us to remember that this isn't really classroom music. I'm not sure any music is classroom music, honestly, but it's really not classroom music. I mean, and jazz education was at the founding of the music. It was just not a thing. I mean, jazz education was the fact that you played with other people and you
It was
learned.
an experience
Yeah,
rather than.
and learning to play from your elders, from anything that you could sort of glean from their performances, from playing with them. Um, eventually with the advent of recording, then and the recording industry, then also learning from recordings and from radio was a big way that music got around. Um, but I know for myself personally, yeah, I mean, just I'm in heavy debt to many elders
Mm-hmm.
who continued to hire me for gigs, even though I definitely was not that good at the time, and would just drop little things here and there. Sometimes it would be verbal, like, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
just,
Yeah, yeah.
Other times it would just be a look, uh, or or a smile or a wink or even just something felt in the music itself when it was happening that I would have to go home and kind of sort out. It still happens, still
Right.
happens, but just it's something that is traditionally just part of the music that you know. I think it's really important to play with people who are older and more experienced and better than you,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
get them, if you can, get them to tell their stories, uh, any kind of story, but just stuff that they remember. And if they do start telling stories, then shut up and listen, and just get
Yeah. And right. And actually, that's what part of like this project is with the podcast is to gain some insight. It's not in like a musical setting, but to like, yeah, get a little more insight in and any interesting like ideas that should be passed on. You had mentioned to us earlier about that there had been a few members in the jazz community who had passed away in the past few months, and that made you like step back and think of well, if jazz specifically is more of an oral tradition, when these people pass on, then something is lost. A lot is lost. Not just the person, but all of their experience, and being able to play with them, and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think we can certainly take a lot from playing with our elders, with our teachers, and yeah, and just draw from their experiences.
yeah.
Yeah. You talk about like, I think in jazz, there's the oral tradition takes a different meaning because you're learning by listening so much, like using your ear in a different way than we do if we're reading off the page. But I think, I mean, obviously we all learn from listening in classical music as well to the way that people play. But I think, like you said about listening to your teachers or listening to people tell stories, and like I think a lot about when I was in school and how much importance my first teacher in college placed on knowing like your lineage of teaching and who your teachers were, and understanding where like even just the warm-ups that you do came from, and how all of that kind of came to be. And I think I really enjoyed that aspect of teaching, and working with my students and like sharing all these little exercises that aren't written down, or these concepts that are just, they were just shared with me by my teachers. And we study with different people and we start to pull those together. So in some way, you have a little bit of that oral tradition just as part of teaching, even if you're teaching a classical orchestral instrument. There's still an element of that which is really neat to think about. That I think it's part of what we do, but we don't contextualize it all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've learned a lot from the all the local musicians, older and more experienced than myself, that I've gotten to play with. And it's one of those things that when you're younger, sometimes I was a little oblivious to maybe what what I should have been picking up, but eventually, memory is a tricky thing, but eventually I feel like it gets through my skull somehow. Um, so yeah, I'm really indebted to a lot of the local players.
I mean, do you get nervous for performances? Do you still?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not, I would like to think not debilitatingly so, but um, you know, I've got a copy of the Inner Game of Tennis,
Right.
and a few other things too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all do. I mean, I think hopefully, as you, I'm no longer young, that's for sure. So I mean, hopefully, as we age and as you gain an experience, I mean, I'd like to think I've learned a little bit here and there about how to channel that energy. I
Mm-hmm.
try to look at nerves as being energy rather
Mm-hmm.
than being something debilitating or negative.
Right.
And so
Mm-hmm.
then how do I find a way to channel that energy or center it? when we're getting ready for a performance. It's also exciting.
Yeah.
As far as de-stressing, things like that.
I mean, you ride bike a lot, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I used to play soccer a lot, and that was beating up my body a little bit too much. So yeah, I really like to ride my bike a lot. Put in the miles, and that seems to help the overall level.
Yeah.
Stress. No, it helps a lot. I mean, to the point where my wife definitely notices if I haven't been getting out on the bike.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So that's something. Yeah, that's something I really enjoy. And also, I'm sort of an amateur mechanic, so working on the bike itself. And
Oh, okay. Yeah.
whether it's building it up from just the frame and some parts, or the routine maintenance kinds of things. I just enjoy getting down there in the basement and getting a little greasy and working on stuff. It's fun.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I have these little hobbies around the house too. I roast coffee at home. I brew beer in my kitchen. It's just like silly hobbies like that too. But I find them fun, and
No, that's great. Wow. Coffee and beer.
Gives your brain some space to get out of like the other stuff you're doing, like think in detail about other things.
Yeah, Morgan. Yeah, and because there's like technique in that too. Like, I mean, if I mess up the coffee roasting, I'm going to know, and I'm going to be upset, because that's maybe too much pressure. But if I mess up the roast, it'll be too dark, or it'll taste like Starbucks. It'll be really charred or something. Then I'm not real happy with that. So I've tinkered around with how to do that, rewiring things and things like that, so I can kind of control the roast as I'm doing it. It's just a fun outlet to learn about stuff and to try something new that has sort of some technical knowledge that you need to know about it.
Yeah, it's kind of like your pottery making days, actually.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of, I don't have it anymore. I don't have any technique anymore, but there was definitely technique associated there, and different steps that need to happen in the process, and paying attention to each one of those steps as you go, like any craft.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for sitting down and talking with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thank you to our listeners. This has been a lot of fun for Morgan and I to get to know our colleagues a bit better, and we hope you're enjoying these conversations. If you, our listeners, have any questions or suggestions as to who you might enjoy an interview of, or if you would like to sponsor any of our episodes, we have lots of musicians and students of musicians listening in, so please contact us at lifebetweenthe.notes@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and video versions can be found on Life Between the Notes YouTube channel. So follow us at all of these places and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Ryan.